a post on their Facebook showing a photograph of their trauma ward on New Year's Eve. That trauma ward was empty for the very first time since Chris Hani Baragwana Hospital was established. This goes to show and to prove that alcohol does result in behavior that causes trauma. It is vital that we continue to protect our health services at this crucial time. All beaches, dams, lakes, rivers, public parks, lagoons, and public swimming pools in hotspot areas will be closed to the public. As before, botanical gardens, national parks, and other parks where access control measures and entry limitations are already in place may remain open to the public. One of the challenges that we have as the festive season draws to a close is the huge congestion at many of our land border posts. This has exposed many people to infection as they wait to be processed, and it has been difficult to ensure that the health requirements for entry into South Africa are met. Many people arriving without proof of COVID-19 tests. To reduce congestion and the high risk of transmission, Cabinet has decided that the 20 land ports of entry that are currently open will be closed until the 15th of February for general entry and departure. These include the 6 busiest border posts, which are Beitbridge, Lebombo, Maseru Bridge, Oshhoek, Vicksburg, and Kopfontein. People will, however, still be allowed to enter or depart the country for the following purposes: for the transportation of fuel, cargo, and goods, emergency medical attention for a life-threatening condition, the return of South African nationals, or permanent residents, or persons with other valid visas, diplomats, the departure of foreign nationals, daily commuters from neighboring countries who attend school in South Africa. These measures we had implemented right at the beginning when we had the earlier lockdown. The full list of exemptions will be contained in the regulations. It is necessary that we keep the alert level 3 measures in place until we have passed the peak of new infections and we are certain that the rate of transmission has fallen enough to allow us to safely ease the current restrictions. And I wish to express my appreciation to the religious leaders of our country and the religious community as a whole. In particular, for the support and the understanding that they have demonstrated throughout this pandemic. Not only have faith-based organizations had to limit or to adjust the nature of worship or their various other activities, they have also provided counseling, they've provided support, they've also taken up quite efficiently feeding schemes and other social services to communities. And we commend them for this. At a time when people need both material and spiritual comfort, it is indeed unfortunate that the restrictions on religious and other gatherings have to remain in place for the moment. Research has identified several risks that arise from religious services and other gatherings. These include the risk associated with enclosed spaces, large groups, close proximity to others, staying for long times in one place, and loud talking as well as singing. We will continue our discussions with our religious leaders on how best to safely meet the desire of many of our people to worship in congregation while working together to preserve life. We have communicated this to our religious leaders, and we will be having further discussions with them. As schools and other educational institutions prepare to begin the new academic year, there is understandably concern about whether this is advisable in the midst of a second wave of infections. The National Coronavirus Command Council is dealing with this matter, and we will provide guidance on this matter in the coming days. As the country returns to work after the festive break, it is essential that all places of work ensure that they continue to have safety protocols in place, and they must ensure that these are rigorously adhered to. Our second task, as we chart our path to recovery, is to achieve immunity across our population through a massive program of vaccination. The development of several effective vaccines is the most significant and most promising advance since the onset of the global pandemic. We've always said that an effective vaccine will in the end be a game changer against our fight to COVID-19. Vaccines offer to the peoples of the world a means to control the coronavirus pandemic. A person who is vaccinated has a much reduced chance of becoming ill and dying from COVID-19. When enough people are vaccinated, we will reach what is known as herd immunity, or what I prefer to call population immunity. This is when enough of the population is immune to the virus to provide indirect protection to those who aren't immune, bringing the spread of the virus much more under control. While the actual level needed for herd or population immunity is not known, our scientists estimate that we will likely reach this immunity once around 67% of our population is immune. This amounts to around 40 million people in South Africa. We have put in place a comprehensive vaccination strategy to reach all parts of the country, and we continue to work on this strategy, ensuring that it will be effective. This will be the largest and most complex logistical undertaking in our country's history. It will be far more extensive than our HIV treatment program or even our national, provincial, as well as local government elections in terms of the number of people who have to be reached within a set period or space of time. It will require the active involvement of all spheres of government, all sectors of our society, and all citizens and residents of our country. Our strategy has several parts to it. The first part of our strategy is to acquire enough vaccine doses to reach this population or herd immunity. We are in the process of procuring vaccines through 3 channels. The first one is through the World Health Organization's COVAX facility, which we've spoken about quite often. The second one is the African Union's vaccine initiative. And the third one is the direct engagements that we're having with vaccine manufacturers or developers. As I've reported before, South Africa is part of the global vaccine COVAX facility, in which countries have pooled their resources to support the development of vaccines with a view to ensure that all countries receive an equitable supply of effective vaccines. We will receive vaccine doses for around 10% of our population through the COVAX facility. As the chair of the African Union, we initiated the establishment of an African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, having developed a clear strategy on vaccines. We realized that what we now needed was to go and acquire the vaccines. These will be purchased in bulk, and African countries will be able to order vaccine doses from the pool that we've created at the African Union level. It is estimated that Africa as a whole will need 1.5 billion doses to immunize the target of 60% of the population of our continent. Through intensive engagement with vaccine manufacturers and developers, the task team has done tremendous work to secure vaccine doses for countries on the continent. As I said before, our own Minister of Health, Dr. Zwelini Mkhize, serves on this task team that we established. The South African government has also been engaging directly with several vaccine manufacturers for the past 6 months. Given the massive global demand for vaccines and the vastly greater purchasing power of wealthier countries, we're exploring all avenues to get as many vaccine doses as soon as possible for South Africans. While there are several promising negotiations with a number of different manufacturers that still need to be concluded, we have to date secured 20 million doses to be delivered mainly in the course of the year and substantial amount of it in the first half of the year. We will make further announcement as we conclude our negotiations with these vaccine developers and manufacturers. We are in daily and constant negotiations and contact with all these manufacturers. The second part of our strategy is to identify the priority groups that need to be vaccinated as we receive vaccine doses throughout the year. In phase 1, with the first batch of vaccines, we will prioritize around 1.2 million frontline health workers. In phase 2, when more vaccines arrive, we will prioritize essential workers such as teachers, the police, municipal workers, and other frontline personnel. We will also prioritize people in institutions such as old age homes, shelters, prisons, people over 60 years of age, and adults with comorbidities. The total number we plan to reach in this phase is around 16 million people. In phase 3, with increased supplies of these vaccines, we will then vaccinate the remaining adult population of approximately 22 million people. We will then have reached around 40 million South Africans, which is considered to be appropriate for population immunity. The third part of our strategy is to distribute the vaccines throughout the country and to administer them to those who have been identified to receive them in the various phases that I spoke about. We have established a national coordinating committee which brings together key government departments, but it also brings together key stakeholders in the body politic of our country, which is business, which is labor, which is community-based organizations, to oversee the implementation of our national strategy. We will administer vaccinations through hospitals, through clinics, outreach services, and other mobile clinics and private settings such as doctors' offices, pharmacies, and workplaces as well. We've had several engagements with stakeholders in recent weeks to ensure a coordinated and an inclusive vaccination campaign. An inclusive partnership has been formed between government, medical aid schemes, and the private sector to support the acquisition, the funding, and distribution of vaccines. We see a vital role for organized labor, traditional leaders, and other religious communities in the dissemination of accurate information on vaccines and in ensuring optimal participation in the vaccine program. We welcome the contributions made by civil society, by our academics and others towards the development of an effective national strategy, even when such contributions have been critical of government. We are integrating the full resources and the capacity of our country into a single effort directed at making vaccines available. This collaboration, which is among the most significant of its kind in our history, is essential as we work to gather in solidarity to win the war against COVID-19. There are still some in our country who are skeptical, and many of them are very vocal about vaccines. And there is much disinformation and conspiracy theories that are being spread around about COVID-19 vaccines. Yet vaccines have been used to eradicate diseases such as smallpox, polio. Our children get vaccinated routinely against many diseases such as mumps, measles, rubella, and travelers are often vaccinated against diseases like yellow fever. I was vaccinated against yellow fever just a few months ago. And many South Africans, in one form, shape, or other, have been vaccinated. Every vaccine that will be used in our program will have to be approved by the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, which always applies stringent scientific standards to ensure the safety and efficacy of any drug or treatment that is utilized by the public in our country. South Africa's vaccine strategy is well underway. Understandably, we all want to know when the vaccines will be arriving. Everybody asks that question, and they want the vaccines to arrive yesterday. As we work to secure the supply of sufficient doses in the midst of huge global demand, we are doing and will continue to do everything that's possible to ensure that the process is both transparent and it's handled most effectively and efficiently, and that information is made available to South Africans. I call on all South Africans to be part of the monumental undertaking to roll out the coronavirus vaccine. Although it will be difficult, it will be complex, and it will at times be very frustrating. It is vital that we do this together for the sake of our country and for the well-being of all the people in our country. Now, as we travel together along the path to overcome the coronavirus pandemic, we must never lose sight of the need to act urgently and decisively to end the violence that men perpetrate against the women and the children of our country. Gender-based violence and femicide is our country's second pandemic. Plans to implement social and behavioral change interventions are taking shape. For example, government has been collaborating with several civil society formations to sensitize a number of stakeholders in our country, for instance, taxi drivers and taxi marshals, on gender awareness, on gender norms, the issue of toxic masculinity and gender-based violence and femicide in an effort to change the behavior of the men of South Africa. In another example, faith-based organizations have initiated a campaign to sensitize religious leaders on patriarchy, gender-based violence, and the church. This includes a program where leaders are trained to accompany survivors of gender-based violence from the time they report the incident until they are referred for further service. Faith activists are also trained to support women through the various court processes. Efforts are underway to support women's economic empowerment, especially during this COVID-19 period. This includes training for business women to enable them to access public procurement opportunities. To end harassment at work, South Africa is in the process of ratifying the International Labour Organization Convention 190, which establishes a global standard for the protection of women and other vulnerable groups in the world of work. Nearly half a year has passed since I spoke to you about the coronavirus storm that was sweeping across our nation. I said then that the coronavirus storm is far fiercer and much more destructive than any that we have known before. We are now in the center of that storm. We do not know how much longer it will last or how much worse it will get. But we know what we need to do to weather this storm and to survive. We know what we need to do to protect ourselves and to protect those around us. We know also what we need to do as a nation, as well as a continent and as a global community to overcome the pandemic. We need to therefore act with common purpose, understanding that what we each do is important for ourselves, for our families, our communities, and our society. If we work together as we have done over these many months, if we maintain our resolve, we will realize the new year that we all so dearly hope for. We will find the peace as well as the comfort, the relief, and the good health that we all seek. We will also be able to rebuild our lives and our nation. And as I say, may God continue to bless our beautiful country, as well as to protect all her people. I thank you.
Yeah, guys, ndio nyaya yaRamaposa yaminoti munoti nayo. Pakaipa tatakatatsira pamwe tichanzi back to level 5. So aiwa hakuna level 5. Zviri sei guys?